So in this, at the tail end of the project description, that I sent out Sunday, I last fall we did this project. It's a 2-week cross-hatching project, and I did a drawing along with the students. So these represent the various stages of the drawing, and essentially, you may not be able to spend 10 hours on it, but I spent 10 hours on it. Taking into consideration roughly 5 hours per week, which is about the equivalent of a class or 2 classes per week, right? So now, yeah.
And none of these, on all of these drawings, you don't want us ever using actual outlines beforehand.
That's correct.
Starting off with,
yeah. I'm going to I'll walk through that, David, with a video that I did for a series of books that are at the top of the page. I have a plethora of videos here for you, okay, so that I did as resources for you. I give you more information that you probably can use, but so we'll go over the videos that I have on the playlist here in a second. But I thought I had that there. Maybe I don't. It's here somewhere. Oh, this drawing, yeah. So there's a video I did of this drawing, real time, kind of me drawing the video from scratch to this stage right here. So I'll show you how I block in. It's the same process we did with the books in that book drawing that you guys did a really good job with, I thought, in terms of capturing perspective and just it's that real loose, choppy sort of blocking in thing, okay? Not like going in and being real firm with the outline, okay? So yeah, you'll see how I develop that here in a second. But that's a good question. Okay, so let's go down to the bottom again here. So this might help you a little bit too, David, in terms of your questions. So you can see that's 15 minutes into the drawing right there. So I set it up over there on my table, and actually looked at a pumpkin on a cement block, and I had a nice light white clean sheet of paper behind it, so isolating it, thinking about lighting, all that sort of stuff. Okay, all that stuff's important. But you can see how, it's real light right there, but you can see how no one line for any particular edge of anything, and I'm not even showing the holes in the cement block and none of that stuff. Just really simple in the first 15 minutes, right? And then 2.5 hours in, much more resolution there, right? Okay. So that's the difference, between spending 15 minutes on something and spending 2.5 hours on something. But what can you say about and I'm going to talk about process here in a second, but what can you say about value in this stage, this 2.5 hour stage?
Well, you're on the lower end of the value scale. You're lighter, no darks.
That's right, yeah. So if you can think in terms of thirds again, and 100, 0 to 100, 0 to maybe 30 or something like that on the value scale, right? No super darks on there, right? So that you got to keep that in mind as you develop your drawing. Is there, though, in this drawing relative value? At this stage? Yeah, there is. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to see, because I'm not using hard outline, right? Which David brought up in terms of kind of controlling the shapes and forms, I'm using relative value, right? There's still relative value there. This pumpkin on the left side right here is differentiated from the background because it's a darker value, right? So that's relative value. So you can have a real light value scheme and still possess relative value in your drawing. Now, as I progress the drawing, of course, a little bit more. Just kind of a little darker, not much. This is, that's still 2.5 hours. There we go, 5 hours. I broke these down into different panels, so when we were doing the drawings, I could show the students the drawings in email form. So 5 hours, so double the amount of time right there. So you can see slowly ratcheting up value, okay, over the whole drawing. This is one very important part of this whole thing, is seeing the drawing as a whole. That's why I really did those exercises and stress emphatically playing with the background, playing with the foreground, okay, so that you have a holistic view of the object you're making the drawing, in other words, right? Not the object you're drawing a picture of, because that's still an isolated thing. The pumpkin is different than the block, than the background. But the thing you're making, the drawing, is holistic. So two, you have to address every part of it, okay, all the time. I'm not going to go in here and perfectly finish the right hole of this block and get it as dark as it's ever going to be in the drawing and then move on to the next stage. This is our mindset coming into drawing typically, because of the way we're trained as artists, in terms of coloring book, when we're younger, all that sort of stuff. And by the way, our just general kind of cultural upbringing, I think, trains us that way. You finish that task. Once that's done, move on to the other task. You do this. Once that's done, move on to this. Rather than seeing our experience, the experience of the world as a holistic thing, we have to finish one thing and then move on to another. So that is a detriment when it comes to making art or being creative, I think, because you're again not seeing the forest through the trees. Here I did a kind of a triptych panel. So now it's 7.5 hours there. Let's look at that versus this. Yeah, see, so 5 hours, kind of light, airy, still. Another 2.5 hours, or another 2 hours anyways in, or 2.5 hours. A little more, a little darker. See the dark starting to gather here. I'm countering by going a little darker here, so I'm kind of still creating this overall balance in the drawing just by ratcheting up over here a little bit, over there a little bit, over here a little bit. Front of the, starting to create a much more contrasty relationship between the front of the block down here and the foreground that's catching a lot of light. Okay. Not as dramatic there. Okay. 10 hours. Oops, sorry. 8 hours. So what's the difference between this 8-hour version, right there? This is, think about the time frame here, and 7.5 hours into the drawing. There's my 7.5 hours into the drawing, and here's the 8-hour version. It's only a half an hour difference. What did I do to the drawing?
It got darker.
I went darker. That's right. Yeah. Are the hatching lines any less apparent or more apparent?
More apparent.
Yeah, more apparent. That's right. So darker and more apparent in a half hour's worth of time. So at this point in the drawing, what I felt as an artist was that this was becoming too mannered, too boring. So what I wanted to do is interject some energy into it, right? And because this is a drawing about parallel and cross hatchings, that energy is kind of geometric because there's just a series of parallel lines, which I'll talk about in a second, that are starting to kind of create this kind of staggered energy across the drawing. Here, I didn't really have that yet. It was nice, a delicate, beautiful, kind of resolute drawing, but from my point of view, it wasn't animated enough. So line, in this case cross hatching, can be a really wonderful way to animate a drawing, to bring it into life, to create vibration. Think about it. These lines are just repetitions of a singular kind of shape, or if you want to call a line a shape, singular entity, right? That's repeated, right? Creating rhythm, right? So that's a way to animate the drawing, to bring it back to life. So what I did in a half hour's time is I just took the straight edge and I just mindlessly kind of went over the whole thing, not caring about adhering to edges too much. I just said, I'm going to just bury this thing in a layer of marks for a half hour just to see what happens. So what that did is it obliterated some of the subtleties, but at the same time gave me an opportunity to reinvent the drawing. Okay, to come back and pull with the eraser. That's why I'm saying eraser is not always corrective, but it's an additive tool in that it gives more meaning to the drawing. And so I was able to kind of keep that energy, but then pull back a little bit with that eraser and start to refine it a little bit more. So some of the things that are left over, for instance, I kind of see these parallel lines up here around the pumpkin. I went kind of echoing the curve of the pumpkin there. So in the finished version, they're still there, but they're mitigated a little bit. I kind of went over at the eraser with the straight edge and kind of undid that stuff. So, and here's a more detailed view of the finished. You can kind of see. So, so it creates kind of an echo or an energy. Now notice, look at all the work. I mean, look at a great Van Gogh drawing or painting, and those empty areas in the Van Gogh drawing or painting are chock full of vibrations and energy, okay? So he would never leave anything blank. he'd always address it in terms of some sort of kind of repetition of mark making or pattern or kind of expressive kind of gesture to fill a particular space. The way he drew grass and stuff like that's phenomenal. So same thing going on here. I work this background, by adding and subtracting, over time, quite a bit, right? To get just the right balance between this highlight area back here and this little bit of a cast shadow here, and the dark of the cast shadow of the pumpkin, etc., etc. And I can tell you, I did not do any one. I did not. There's not one. I did not put one curved line in this drawing. All the lines that I made this drawing with are a result of me using the straight edge. Okay, every one of them. Okay, so I think it's a really good discipline to practice using that straight edge as a tool to create dynamism within a drawing. Once you understand what that does to a drawing, then eventually you leave that alone and you can kind of do your own parallel hatches because they have a really sense of structure to them. Okay, but the straight edge really aids in getting that going in your drawing. So, okay, so you can kind of generally see some of the hatching stuff that's going on here. So let's talk a little bit more about hatching specifically and the process here. So hatching consists generally of this idea of hatching. It's similar to the scribble in that it's a buildup of value in a drawing. Okay, it's a way to gain value in a drawing using line as the vehicle. Okay, in this case, straight lines that are parallel to each other. And it's a pretty traditional way of working. If you've never really, most of us are probably familiar with it to some degree. It's not dissimilar from scribbling in that way. Okay, so I'm kind of teaching you two graphite-based mark-making approaches that are different but result kind of in the same end game, which is the buildup of value. Okay, but they both have different expressive potentialities. Okay. In the creation of the work. The crosshatch has obviously a geometric, more kind of hard-edged sort of kind of vibe, but it doesn't mean it's always that way. Where the scribble is a probably softer, more kind of organic vibe. All right, when you practice it effectively. Now, there's been some, great artists throughout the years have used parallel hatching, cross hatching. Where it really came into utility was with the artists of the Renaissance and the Baroque period, I guess, was when it really started to kind of come to fore because of the idea of printmaking. Okay, artists, when the invention of printmaking, etching, I'm going to use that as the example here, when that technicians, whoever invented it, I don't know who invented it, but whoever invented this process, they were able to kind of create drawings that could be duplicated, right? To make a series of prints off of one image, which was pretty phenomenal back in the day. Nobody would ever have thought that would be possible, right? You have a drawing and then you'd make another drawing, right? But the advent of printmaking brought on this idea of being able to duplicate the image. So the technique of creating the print by its very nature, was linear, right? Using line, this overlay of line, to create the buildup of value, like you would with a pencil on a piece of paper. And what they do, just a real quick little synopsis of that for a printmaking, like an etching, what happens is you have a metal plate, copper metal plate, they use different metals, different alloys for it, and then you coat that copper plate with tar, essentially, it's asphaltum. Okay, and that dries, and then you take a stylus, which is just a pointy tool, okay, not a pencil. Now the artist might have sketched up an idea for the print prior to this, right? And then you just cut lines into the tar, into that asphaltum that's laying on the surface, a series of fine marks, right? You can see this Rembrandt. See all the lines in there, all that cross-hatching. Then what you do is you take that metal plate with the asphaltum and the lines cut in it, and you put it in what's called an acid bath. Okay, the acid and metal don't get along. So the acid will eat into those areas that have been revealed through the carving into the tar, right? With the lines, right? So you'll have tar covering the sheet of metal, lines cut into it, so the metal's showing where those lines are cut through the tar. The tar blocks the acid where it lays, where the tar is. Where the tar isn't, and the lines, the acid goes down and cuts grooves into the plate. Minute, right? But it's cutting little grooves into the plate. And so what you do is then you take turpentine or some sort of astringent and you wipe off the tar. Then you have the plate with these really fine lines cut into it from the acid. You take it out of the acid bath, of course. The longer you leave it in the acid bath, the deeper the lines, right? So the darker the etch. So you have this plate, and then you put ink on it, wipe all the ink off, and then there's leftover ink in the grooves. Okay? And then you put a piece of paper on it, run it through a press. The paper goes down into those grooves and picks up the ink. And what you're left with is an impression of the plate, the metal plate that has the grooves cut into it, right? And then you can do multiples of those. So you could do a run of 50 of that plate or more. Okay. And the other nice thing is then the artist could come in, take a look at those proofs, those prints, and say, no, I need to work more on that. So you cover it with tar again, and then keep doing that process until you kind of build up over a long period of time. Like this version of Christ on the Cross here, when I was doing the research here, I think there were 20 versions of this or something, because there were 20 different stages of the etch, right, of the creation of this image. So it's really a very useful tool for artists. Long story short, it lends itself perfectly to this idea of hatching and cross-hatching because of that. Now, there's later on become other techniques involved that you're able to kind of create value without the use of hatching. You can kind of just in one big kind of fell swoop, you can kind of create value. Lithograph allows you to do that. And this, using metal plates, there's techniques that allow you to do that as well. But basically, though, printmaking in the Renaissance time and in the Baroque time was a big, had a big influence in terms of artists practicing this idea of using hatching as a way to create value in a drawing. So here's another Rembrandt print. Master printer, master draftsman, master painter, but it's a nice example, I think, of the two primary techniques here of parallel hatching and cross hatching. So let's look above the mantle here, right in this area right here. There's a certain value assessed to this area right here, and another value assessed to this area right here, right above it, right? Not up in here yet, but just right in here. Why is this area seem lighter than this area right in here?
The lighter area doesn't have the cross hatch; it just has a parallel hatch.
Well, no, I'm not talking about up here yet, but that's correct in terms of this area. That's right. Yeah, you're a little bit ahead of me there, but that's correct in terms of that area. I'm talking about this area right in here, the space between those two.
Oh,
I was going to say it's denser.
Yeah, there's more of them, right? So, there's just more lines there. They're not darker, there's just more of them. So it creates this impression of darker value, just like pixels on a screen or in a photograph or whatever. It's the same essential principle, right? For the most part. And then, Stephanie, up here, once we get into that area, then he starts crossing them, right? And so that increases even more. So we already have this dense pattern of parallel hatches here that's right up into this area, and then he's doing what's called the cross hatch, going in an opposite direction or a direction that's not parallel to the first set of parallel lines. So parallel hatching is just a set of parallel lines that move across a certain space on the picture plane that will give a relative sense of value to that area. Cross hatching is just a way to kind of ramp that up, essentially, okay? So let's look in this area right here, right behind his back. He's probably doing this cross-hatching 3 or 4 different directions. This direction, 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 to get that density of value there. He's not coloring it all in, right? There's still, it's still, it wouldn't call it the color of ink. If it was the color of ink, this would all be black here, right? There's still lighter value in there in these spaces between the lines, right? It gets pretty pixelated there, but you can get what I'm talking about, okay? Okay, so that's the difference between, you can see it in this illustration right here. Kind of nice. A parallel hatch and a cross hatch. Cross hatches are just bundles of parallel hatches that go in different directions. Okay. A contour hatch is a series of parallel hatches that ride in a curved pattern. They're still parallel to each other, that elicit or engender the contour, meaning the surface curve of any particular thing you're trying to draw. So rather than doing just straight lines in this area, or in the hair for that matter, see these are curved lines that are parallel to each other. The artist chose to curve them in order to reveal the curvature of the contour of the neck, right? The way it curves around, or the breastplate down here. Curved lines. Okay. So 3 types of hatching: parallel hatching, cross hatching, and then parallel hatching that is a little different in that it's revealing the curved surface of something. That was called contour hatching. Okay. And here's a, this has a nice example of it here. It looks like they put some white chalk in here. This is Dürer, I believe. But you can kind of see how those parallel hatches are curving around the curvature of the form there, okay? I don't want you to do that in your drawing necessarily, because I want you to really discipline yourself with the straight edge. But it's a nice tool. It's a real nice tool, and it is very difficult to do, okay? Because you got to be right on. You got to really understand what is the curve of that. If you're not right on with those curve, how much is the finger curve? The barrel of the finger, right, as it kind of comes out. If you don't really understand that, it's going to totally decimate any sense of form you're trying to create. Okay, so you always have to be careful with that. But it's a really nice tool, that idea of contour hatching. One more thing about this idea of so here's Dürer. Albert Dürer is a great German artist, one of the greatest artists of all time. Here's the, I think, St. Jerome, I believe, the overall, or is it? Maybe here somewhere. So here's the overall. This might be an etching, or this might be an engraving. An engraving is essentially the same as etching, except you take a stylus and you carve right into the metal plate rather than using that acid technique. So you're, like our dollar bills are engraving, that they're actually carved. All those lines on the dollar bill are actually carved with a stylus into a metal plate, if they still do it that way. I think they do. This piece, I believe this is an engraving. I don't know for sure, but it looks like to me like it. So every value in this print is a result of these intersecting parallel hatchings, okay, into engraving. Yeah, imagine the work in that, right? This is nice over here. Now he would have technicians, right, to help him out with this stuff. He would do the art, he would do the drawings, and then the technician would probably even work on the plate, etching it in, and then he'd supervise, et cetera, like a director of a film, right? The pillows over here have this parallel hatching thing going on. If you can kind of see that, it's kind of pixelated there, but some kind of curved parallel hatches over there to give that softness of that object, right? So the type of hatch you use will engender, textural or kind of material qualities that will help the drawing, okay? For instance, down here, let me go up to the detailed view here. Move this out a little bit. So that's the bottom left corner of that print I just showed you, where the doggy and the lion are laying down together. I guess it's the doggy, I don't know. So look at the hatching that's taking place in this area right here. We have, if you can see it, a series of parallel lines that are running kind of diagonal on the drawing, right? Notice they're running along the edge, parallel to the edge of this block, or limestone block or whatever it is, right? And we have a series, you can't see the individual lines, but you can kind of infer it by what you can see, that they're running along the direction of the vertical plane of this object, okay? So the direction of those lines are not arbitrary. What do I mean by saying the direction of, or the angle of these parallel lines that he's using here to create this little cast shadow are not arbitrary? Like in the Rembrandt, they were kind of arbitrary. In this, they're not arbitrary.
It looks like they're matching the perspective.
Yeah,
Like
yep,
the
that's it.
way
Yep, yep, that's it exactly. That's it exactly. So you can use, and you'll note that in the block drawing I did, in the book drawing as well. I'll show you here in a second. The direction I'm making my marks are sometimes arbitrary, but most other times they're representing maybe a recession of a plane or a plane facing me, so I'll put marks straight up and down. So the parallel hatching you can do in a drawing can also reveal planier, perspectival issues in the drawing. It's a way to reinforce this idea of perspective. Look at the horizontal nature of these lines right here. Series of lines coming straight across. They represent the flatness of this plane right here, i.e. they're running parallel to the back edge of this plane right there. Okay. And there are some in the steeper shadow that run directionally like the ones down here. Look at all the horizontal hatching that goes on back here. Why? Because that's the floor. Kind of makes sense to do horizontal hatching on the floor. It's flatness. And you just kind of progress that up, fill that space with it. That's even running down through here. So you can see how the artist is using this hatching to create value, to create expressive content, and to reinforce that idea of perspective in the drawing. Okay? See how complicated it is to be an artist? But that's all about representation, right? And beauty, using formal devices to get your point across. This is why I stress this so much in this class, this idea of technique and process. I know we're not drawing things you want to draw, but it's conjecture on my part, maybe we are. But that teaches you how to draw, okay? So drawing a series of books with an apple on it, right? Yeah, what does that mean, Blake? I don't know. Let's let the viewer figure that out. But if you can draw it in a very elegant, beautiful way, then that's 90% of the battle in terms of being an artist, right? Or being somebody who can kind of pursue a career in art, because then you can kind of totally say, well, to hell with that. I reject all that, and I'm going to do something different. Well, you can't reject something you don't know. You're not familiar with, right? So even if you don't want to use hatching in your work ever again, just experiencing it a little bit and trying to perfect it, I think, is a good thing, because it teaches you about the structure of the drawing, I think, and also about observation in that regard. So. Because you're thinking about the planes and the way the floor recedes away from us, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so embedded in this work here is like millions, hundreds of thousands, millions, I don't know, of lines that are going in a certain direction on the picture plane that are representing this illusion of space, right? Illusion of wood grain. It's really phenomenal when you think about it. Kind of the advent of, I love photography, it's one of my favorite things to do now, but the advent of photography has kind of spoiled us in that regard, in terms of really understanding the immensity of what these artists were capable of producing, right? In terms of technique. Now look at the Baroque. This is Rembrandt. A little later, whole different vibe, right? Whole different vibe. Much more expressionistic, right? I would call it. Less kind of classical in his approach, and that the Baroque artists were about that, right? They were kind of about that idea of kind of just capturing the essence, but they're still using those techniques, right? look at the figures are even more kind of a little more distorted. It's just kind of, he didn't care about that. He cared about portraying through this methodology an essence, an energy, right? It looks like Jesus on the cross. Yeah, it is. But even there's some distortion here with the figure. But Rembrandt didn't really care about that. He could draw anything he wanted to it in any way. So here he's rejecting kind of realistic modes of representation in lieu of more expressive kind of desires here. So look at how these verticals come right down through this guy, right? And then he didn't even have that guy in there. I don't know how he did it, but he just kind of, those are just continuing those vertical parallel lines right through. And then he goes in with some smaller marks and starts to pull the guy out of the field of marks. So we always have a fear of interfering one object with another, and then we end up with these kind of cloistered objects in the drawing, and they never have a relationship to one another in real space. So always be mindful of that as you develop a drawing. Okay, so that's kind of cross-hatching in a nutshell. Here's a Durer, by the way, I threw into the, kind of the mix there. It's a watercolor, I think, that he did, but just a fabulous artist. Now, my point here of including this was you could go out and look at the grass and some dandelions that are ready to open, and not think of the awe of the sublime, the awe of nature, the beauty of the world, right?
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
Was this draw of the one with grass? Was that also done with scribbles?
No, this is a watercolor. This is a painting. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a watercolor study he did. It might be an oil, but I don't think so. It might be, I don't know, but this is not that technique. I just threw it in, David, as a way to kind of show that he's a painter as well, because some of the images above for Durer's work, that the Jerome, the guy, the one with the lion and that's the same guy that did this. So I just threw it in, but I mainly threw it in just to show you how art I shouldn't say it's not always, but is not always about finding or inventing the novel in terms of content. It's often more profoundly about observing the way the world looks, okay, and being able to kind of deftly and with a sense of articulation define that in the work, okay? And then that's where meaning and beauty start to emerge in the work. So if you went out and look at a bunch of dandelions about ready to open in the spring, you might not be as kind of like thrilled about seeing that as you would seeing this, right? So there's something about the translation, because he's such a great artist, that makes it a beautiful work of art. Okay, my point is, even the most banal thing can create a wonderful work of art. Okay, that's, I guess, my point here. So of including that. Okay, because we're essentially using banal objects to make this drawing.
Can I just say,
yeah.
In that dandelion thing, what I really like about it is the layering.
Yeah.
So you can see the things in the back, but then he drew things over the top.
Yeah.
Little strands of grass or stems.
Yeah.
It's definitely, it's like three-dimensional in this. Anyway.
And that's a result of him really understanding value, right? So color too, of course, but that these darker values are recessed and deeper, right? And then these lighter values pop out at us. So here's an artist who really understands the formal qualities, visually speaking, of the things in the world around him, and able to translate that onto the drawing. So that depth is definitely a result of those value shifts, right? Even though it's color based, there are still value. Color still possesses value, but value doesn't necessarily possess color, which is because we're doing all black and white drawings, right? But that's
it's still similar to the cross hatching, where there's these stems and then these other stems. I don't know.
No, in terms of the revelation of form, yes, because of value shifts. But the technique of cross hatching doesn't exist in this.
Yeah.
But they're moving in the same direction in terms of revelation of form, right? Shape and form, right? So that's very true. I like too how he kept the background plain, and so it becomes a very kind of design-oriented, graphic image as well. It's like he was just focused on this clump of grass with dandelions, and he popped that out of reality and put it into a different world. He didn't put any other stuff in here to mess up the drawing, right? So it's like a study. He was really good at it. He did this rabbit's painting. I think it was an oil, but I'm not sure. That's just remarkable, of a dead rabbit, right? But it's like, oh my God, that's beautiful, you know. So yeah, he was great. But yeah, that density of value here, really important, you know. And all that comes from drawing, right? He's not drawing just to be a better draftsman. He's practicing drawing so he can see the world better, like I brought up with Leonardo before, right? Leonardo wanted to draw so he could see what those flowers look like. If he just sat there and looked at the flowers, he couldn't see them because he's not having to replicate them, right? So that's the beauty of drawing. Even if you're not going to be an artist, right? You know, if you're going into some other discipline or creative discipline, this practice of drawing really makes you see the world better, right? And it's a struggle, and you may not succeed, you know, in a drawing one class in terms of like having the perfect drawing. You know, who does? But you know, the fact that you're going through this is more important than making the perfect drawing. You know, I kind of don't, you know, I rarely see perfect drawings. You know, I never saw a perfect drawing I made. So. This is Rembrandt is famous for doing self-portraits. This is a later stage self-portrait, I think, of him. But you can definitely see the cross-hatching, how he's really building it up over here, right? And then hardly any here, and then a little of the decorative contour line here, right? Just the way, you know, and the brevity. I love his work just because of the brevity of it. You know, he knew when to put a mark down, when to leave it, when to take it away. Just enough information to get the job done, right? You look close here, it's just a bunch of dots and dashes and marks and crosses. Of course, it's pixelated, right? And there's an energy here. There's a really nice, just a motion to these parallel hatches. Degas was another great artist who did that, French Impressionist or Post-Impressionist. So, okay. So let's go to the video here real quick and just talk a little bit, and then I'll set you on your way. Any questions so far? No? So there's a link in the thing I sent out that'll get you to this list of videos I made that kind of outline this whole process. So these first series right here. So when you hit that link, all these will open up for you. Okay. This first series is broken down into 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and it's narrated. Okay. The second series is how fast it. Because I speed things up here because I just want, you know, each one is about 10 minutes, but the drawing probably took, you'll see this is the drawing of let me open it up just to show you. I don't know, the drawing was probably, again, an 8-10 hour drawing. I don't know when I was done with it. So it's just a series of books with a rock on it and a ball, right, you know. So that's the drawing that I outlined the creation of. So, you know, you might want to kind of take a look at that. So, that's the first 3. This one I document kind of how fast I made the drawing, because that was a question by one of the students last semester was, yeah, you speed the drawing up, but I don't know how fast it. Here's your David. Here's your kind of how I'm blocking in the block, right? Really light touch, sliding that ruler around rapidly, making assessments. There, I'm doing visual measurement.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like doing the very light lines, just so you can understand the basic. Well, like where the lines would be going. Per se, towards the.
Right, the angle, the spacing, so you can get a sense of scale, all that stuff. And again, this is what I'm looking at up here. I mean, literally looking at I took a shot of it, but that's kind of what I had the setup in front of me there. Now, see what I did there? Notice what I did there. I used the ruler. Back that up a little bit. There, I'm just doing some visual measurement and assessments. So when I had you do that middle exercise of moving the ruler and making the parallel lines.
That's why.
Yep. Now, see, I have the ruler at the angle that is generally the angle at the end of the block over here, right? If you can see that. The end of the block is right there. The angle of the end of the block right there. I'm documenting it right there, just with a little light line. So I'm laying my ruler down, sliding the ruler as I go back and forth. If you can see that up there. Revealing the plane, the angle of the plane as it's moving away from me. So watch how I do that. So like, you really can't see, but I create a series of light lines that are kind of running at the angle of that block, right? Just like I talked about with Durr in that St. Jerome drawing. And I'm doing the same. I'll do the same here. Let's see. I guess not. Yeah, a little bit on the pumpkin. So I'm just doing vertical lines to start to fill in the darkness on the pumpkin. So rather than doing curves there, I just use the straight edge and just slide it across. It gives me structure. You see me doing this in the air. It gives me structure to the drawing. It gives me a sense of angularity in the drawing. Okay. Yet the marks are kind of organic because they're curving a little bit because the ruler's moving, right? That's why I had you do that exercise so you can start to think about this flexibility of moving the parallel hatches at a certain angle, while engendering this idea of movement at the same time, that it's not just one straight line after another, okay? So you can start to see I'm just lightly starting to build this. There I am sliding the ruler along the angle of the front of that thing, right? Keeping that geometric nature of this. So there's a crosshatch starting to happen right in here. See these, I don't know where I did them. Well, yeah, I mean, you can view the video and start to analyze this stuff and think about this, okay? But, I ran a series of verticals along the front edge here. Let's see how I did that. There I am. So I'm going to slide the ruler, maintaining the vertical, and that helps me with understanding that front side of that block drops straight down. Now, multiply this over a period of time, and you start to build up these parallel lines everywhere on the drawing. Multiply it by 1,000, and you start to get to the finished drawing, right? Essentially. Okay, so there's that video. So that's a real-time version. I just did this as a kind of a separate little video from these three right here, okay? And then I did a series of books doing the same thing, okay? Or an open book, I'm sorry, an open book doing the same thing. Now I started this drawing with just a bunch of lines on the piece of paper, lightly drawn. That's a strategy. Like the scribbles, you're just loosening up a little bit. I'm not even worried about a book yet. Now I'm moving faster than real life here. And I'm going a little darker than I would normally, just because I wanted you to see this. All right, now tell me when the open book starts to form. Right now I'm just playing. Just dispersing the energy in the picture plane. Thinking about the entire picture plane. Just playing with the picture plane. Tell me when you start to see the open book.
Now you're starting to take some measurements.
Yeah.
It looks like
See how I'm gathering some lines down here? I no longer have equilibrium on the drawing, right? I'm starting to gather some marks down here. So there's an energy down at the bottom of the drawing now. It's still very abstract, right? Best realistic drawings are real abstract. Got to think of them in abstract terms. See the book yet?
There's a page. Oh, there it comes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm beginning to see it slowly.
Yeah. Like an open book, right? Just laying open.
Mm-hmm.
So notice I don't know where any one edge in this book is going to be, but I'm guessing. I'm just chopping away. Chop, 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 like the sculptor would do with a big chisel, and then refine it as they go. It's guesses. I'm guessing at angles and position. What's that?
I mean, these type of exercises are almost give you like this childish.
Yes.
Fun where you.
Yep. Because of the simplicity, kind of the simple-minded sort of it's sophisticated, it's radically sophisticated, but it's almost simple-minded too. Because you're drawing in a way that is simple. You're not trying to overanalyze the work to begin with. Your main task to begin with is to figure out how big the thing is going to be on the drawing, its relative scale in terms of, or proportion in terms of like the left side of the book versus the right side of the book, et cetera, et cetera.
How they say easy to learn, hard to master.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can start to see the book starting to emerge there. Now let's jump ahead a little bit. So once I figure out that I'm in a good space with stuff, I can get a little darker with the lines maybe, a little more comfortable at that point. No one line yet is going to be a final determining factor in terms of the drawing. Let's move ahead a little bit more. Okay, look what I did here now. Let's see if I can find it. There I am. That's like, Blake, you're ignoring something. Okay. What was I ignoring?
Background.
Yeah, everything that's not the book, right? I was becoming so fixated on the book that I was losing energy out here. It's a whole picture. This book lives in a space. I've got to, maybe it's not that dark. I don't know. Maybe it is, but I've got to address it at any rate. So you can see the difference. Once I start addressing that, it starts to kind of, then I do some, cross-hatching in the other direction. Just to give give some kind of life to the picture plane, right? You cover every centimeter of that drawing. I see it endlessly. The students are just so fixated on the object. So fixated on the object that they don't see it in the larger scheme of things. Okay, I don't know how many videos I have of this, but let me go to the end of this one just to show you. Now what I did here was, and you can do this if you want to, I'm not a huge advocate. I mean, it's okay. What I did is I took my hand, I don't know if I show that here. I don't see it here now. And I just kind of gently, the ruler's going to do it anyways, but I just gently kind of took my hand and just, palm of my hand, just kind of rubbed over everything indiscriminately, just to subtly blend things together. And what I'm doing is take that graphite, I'm raking that graphite. I'm not rubbing away marks, but all I'm doing is taking the graphite that's laying on the paper and pushing it around so it creates this really muted, soft, beautiful tone. Because then what I can do is get the straight edge and the pencil eraser, right? Now, if you don't have that pencil eraser, get a bunch of these pencils. And I went through so many of these pencils to create these drawings. I would buy them just to buy the eraser part, right? So, but I had you guys get a pencil eraser, a smaller eraser if you have those. If you don't, you have to rely on the back end of a conventional pencil, okay? Because you look at these lines right up here. See these parallel hatching lines right up here? I did that by using the straight edge with the eraser instead. So you can start to do a push-pull here on your drawing to correct and also add a different value relationships in the drawing, okay? And I'm using a wide eraser too in places to kind of undo stuff. You can do that as well. I didn't do that at all in the block drawing, I don't think, but in this drawing I did. So essentially you see by the end of this drawing, I can start to gain some resolution. And resolution happens at the end of the drawing, not at the beginning.
I have a question about background.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we have the white background, once we start really giving that value, then it's no longer a white background?
Yeah, it's still white because it's a relative value. So let me show you something here. Nothing is zero on the white value scale, except if you were looking at the sun. Okay, if you happen to be drawing a picture of the sun, then that would be zero. Okay, meaning the whitest, the brightest that ever could be. Okay, everything else has a value on it, unless you're looking like right at a light bulb. Everything else has a value on it. So even the white piece of paper that's laying behind your setup has a value on it, okay? There's always going to be something brighter than that, okay? So was on a white sheet of paper. I painstakingly, kind of rolled up a white sheet of paper behind the drawing, and I'll show you that in a second. But it still reads as white, even though there's a lot of different values on here in the background. Okay, so that's okay. And the other thing is you can do it for artistic purposes. So essentially, in these block drawings, notice how I kind of created this vignetting effect here, right? So I went into the corners of the drawings here and played around with mark making and, just kind of noodled with parallel. And you can see how I erased into it here to create this lighter area here, darker areas. It fades into infinity way far away from me, right? So I'm using these darker values as a way to kind of infer that the background's moving away from me, right? Number one. And number two is a way to control the corners of the composition. This is even a little darker here than right in front of here. Look at all the erasures I did on here, by the way, with those parallel erasing lines. Now, I'm talking about layers. I'm not talking about like 2 layers or 3 layers. I'm talking about addressing every inch of these drawings with 10, 20, 30, 40 layers, depending upon what area you're at. So you're a maniac. You got to be a mark-making maniac. MMM, okay? Mark-making maniac, okay? With when you make art. And you notice I'm moving quite quickly. I'm not stopping ever and assessing the drawing. I'm just kind of keep going with it. I keep reacting. So does that help, Christine, with your question there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was struggling with that last one, with it being a white object with a white background.
Yeah.
Of how do I do a background? And so
now the nice out is that you have the eraser now that you can. So what it's doing is that you could get back to that original white almost with the eraser, but you have these remnants of the other stuff that went on in the drawing, and that adds to the expressive content of the drawing, right? So you have all this kind of process stuff that's revealing itself. That's what makes the drawing beautiful, right? So like I was saying, you might pull that background at certain areas back totally to almost white by the end of the drawing, but you're going to have a lot of evidence in there of you messing around up in that area, and that's going to lend itself to make the drawing better. Does that make sense? Yeah. It gives like an old antique object, right? It has a certain patina on the surface. I don't know if you guys like looking at old objects, but a really beautiful old object has a real quality to it. Why? Not because of the color necessarily or because of the texture of the surface, because it feels like it's been used, right? There's an energy to it. There's a vibration to it. Same with the drawing. If you're going to ignore an area on a drawing, i.e. you don't use that area at all, you never address it, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb and the drawing will never feel complete, right? But if you go up there and play and play and play and push and pull and do different hatching and and over a long period of time, even though it's an empty background, it's going to make the drawing much richer, okay? Just because of that energy it exudes, okay? This is why it takes a long time to make a drawing, a really nice drawing, for the most part. I mean, there are masters who can do it and do a drawing. David Hockney, 15-minute drawing, that's a masterpiece. But that's because they did other things that they worked years on, right? So they understand the potential there. Okay. All right, one more thing here. So, and then I talk about in this one just this idea of lighting. Okay, so I kind of outline, these resources are here for you. So I kind of go over, this idea of directional light and all that, with the open book drawing. So talk about angle, I'm just hitting all the basics here because you can't forget about proportion, angle approximation, all that stuff is embedded in these. It's just you have the extra thing going on of parallel hatching and value relationship, okay? And then I did a digital drawing here. I wasn't so happy with these. This is when I first started. But it's, again, an open book, so you won't see my hand in these. But it gives you a nice idea of how to build value over time. It's a nice drawing. So, you may want to look at that as well. That's last on the list. Oh, and I have one more thing here on this in these videos I threw in here. And this is an important one because in terms of drawing the organic form, yeah, anybody, if you have a French curve, you can draw a really nice curve, right? But how do you interpret that curve in relation to the verticals and horizontals on the picture plane, right? A curve is not just a curve. A curve has a general trajectory, a general sense of location, right? A general sense of gravity. So in this drawing, I kind of outlined this idea of using facets or the straight line as a way to do that. Let's see if I can hear you.
So I could probably break this down into initially maybe three straight lines that kind of, let me back up there. When seen together, will infer the trajectory of that curve, right?
So understand what I'm doing there is there's a certain angle of this line to the left, right? Relative to the edge of the page over here. It might be a 45-degree angle. This is almost horizontal. This is a more horizontal angle than this one, right? But a longer one. So I can kind of dissect the curvilinear nature of this curve. I'm being redundant there. Its position on the page by documenting it with these ideas of facets. In life drawing, I teach that a lot.
See, I'm doing that.
Because a curve is just not a curve.
Curve by any stretch of the imagination, but what it is, a curved edge or inferring a curved edge, a certain length of that curve.
Doing the bottom one there too as well. It's a really complicated concept. So I've kind of inferred a shape here, right, using these French curves, and then figured out that the angle of these curves have a certain angular trajectory. So I defined this one through 3 angles here, right? So it's really good to understand that when you're drawing a curve. That's why I want you to draw everything with a ruler, with a straight edge. At the end of the drawing, you can do this.
Right? Lines, that's all. Once I put the curve back in. But this is a push-pull.
So what I did is I took that red and kind of just blended it, right? So understanding how to draw a curvilinear object using these facets is really important. Okay. It does 2 things. You're creating a curve by understanding its angle relative to the horizontals and verticals, i.e. the edges of the drawing, number 1. And number 2, you're tying into the process of the drawing, which is using hatching and straight edges. So you're continuing the language of the drawing. Okay. Again, this is pretty sophisticated stuff here, but it's important to kind of understand all this stuff. So for instance, the pumpkin here, you can see how I started to block it in early on in the drawing. Just kind of see the facets. Probably, 8 on each side, facets. And then at the end of the drawing, I kind of cut those facets in half and cut them in half again, so you get, you could start to round out the corners of the thing. All right? So it's a really nice way to learn how to draw curved forms, is think about them in these faceted increments, okay? Because it makes you understand that the curve has a relationship to vertical and horizontal. It's not just a curve floating in space nowhere, somewhere. Okay. Just about done here. So those are the videos that are at your disposal here. Okay. I would focus a lot on these first 3 there. Okay.
And also cross-hatching as well.
And I kind of go over all that stuff here in terms of what Dave was asking, blocking in the drawing. But I do it in such a way also that I'm talking about angle, how to approximate the angles again. We're back to that. So, I'm almost done here. But the other thing I talk about in this first part of this video is this idea of, I talk about, what is the angle, the edge of the book, all that stuff that we struggle with at the beginning of the semester, and visual measurement, what's the depth of something versus its length and width and all that sort of stuff. Notice I did my books at each at a little different angle from one another, right? Just to give it a little variety, set a rock on top and did a ball down here. But my point is here, I'm thinking intently about the layout of the drawing. And what I talk about in the video is these again, background spaces relative to the space that is the object. So in this drawing, I almost took the rock right off the edge of the top of the drawing. And some folks would be loath to do that, But I balanced that out by understanding the ball was over here and the cast shadow of the ball would go off the edge of the composition over here. I have this negative space here. This big open space to the right, big open space to the left, and then I fit the objects in the drawing in there. So if you can wrap your head around that as you start to block in your drawing and think about how the thing is fitting in the composition, you're ahead of the game. Because oftentimes students will have no conceptualization of the parameters of the drawing, and they'll just put a small set of objects or whatever they're drawing floating in the middle of a big empty space. They won't think too much about, you guys did a pretty good job with that, by the way, but they won't think too much about scaling the drawing up, so maybe one of the objects almost comes off the top of the paper, right? So this negative versus positive space issue is really important. Okay, so visually, as you do your drawing, think about breaking it down that way. Okay, think about blocking it in such a way that you have an interesting composition, and then you just go to town, starting to fill, do your parallel hatches and all that stuff as you go.
I kind of start to.
Here, this is a good one in terms of this video. See, I kind of just slide the ruler along, just create those parallel lines, right? And I'm moving quickly. I don't move that quickly, but I sped the thing up. But I'm not waiting. I'm just my job. I'm a workman here. My job is to fill this darn piece of paper up. Once I start to block everything in, and not worry too much. Move lightly, tread lightly, but rapidly. That's why we just did those sketches, those exercises against drawing lightly. Now I'm going a little darker than I would normally here, just so you can kind of see the video, and I probably ratcheted up the contrast a little bit too as well. But okay, so you got like 30 minutes of this, of me moving very quickly through this drawing. I get to a certain point, then I can start to go in and do the erasure stuff. Okay, and I'll show you this, and that'll be it. See if I have any examples of that. Notice even the cover of the book has thickness, right? See the thick, and I'll go in and put highlights around there and stuff to show the getting low reflected quality there. Well, you'll have to find it yourself, but there's see I have an eraser in my, see these lines right here, I erased right where the ruler's covering up. There's a series of parallel hatches that move up the length of that are erasing instead of adding dark. That just creates further density to the drawing, which is good, and it lightens it up. It does two things. Okay. And I use the ruler to protect edges too sometimes. So if I don't want a series of marks to invade another area, I'll cover that area with the ruler and just do quick little parallel hatches up to it, right? So that I can kind of prevent a migration of hatches going places I don't want to go. This whole ball over here is done with all just parallel hatches. You can kind of see no rounding at all there, okay? This light area right here didn't exist at one point, but on the right of the ball. I went in and kind of lightened that up. I don't know if I have that on here. But yeah, see how dull this is, right? This little area right here. That's pretty bright. So I went in and with the ruler. Trying to look for it here because it's a nice little teaching moment, I think. No, I can't. I did it in there somewhere. I can't find it. Anyways, so push-pull, push-pull the drawing once you get it to a certain point. Here's some befores and afters with some student work that I pulled up that I thought I'd share with you before I let you go. This one, let's see here. This was one I did. I liked what the student did here, but what didn't she do that I was asking her to do? That was her finished piece right here. Nice, I like the drawing, but
it's not really scribbling. It's clear that she just drew an outline of it first and then started going around it.
Yeah, what else though? Something even more important than that. It's missing. What is this drawing missing that this drawing has?
Which is
Okay.
the
Value?
Value, yeah. Value.
she didn't start light.
We don't know that because I didn't, I'm not showing you the first version. This was her this was her last version right here. This is my amended version.
Oh, she didn't do anything to the background.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Which makes it hard to tell value because of it.
Yeah, exactly. So it is what you said it is, Dave. It's an outline drawing essentially, right? So because there's no value and there's no energy to the drawing, right? Just and it's a nice. I love it. I love her drawing. But then see, like, here's where you can take it. Here, if you were making marks everywhere on this drawing, it's going to be a richer drawing overall. There's going to be a vibration area. So I spent, I don't know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes just kind of going crazy with digital marking on her drawing to show her where it could go, right? Because she avoided the primary issue that I wanted her to think about in the drawing. And you guys is like, don't leave it. It's half empty. Make marks everywhere. Enjoy the process. Spread the wealth, right, around the drawing. Okay. So before and after, okay. So just ratcheting up value. That's a nice drawing, I think. Before and after, pretty tight here. She was a really good artist. This is from Summer, but that may be a little too tight for my taste for the first week. But and then the finished drawing here, but nice nonetheless. Really nice. And then and then the finished drawing. She could have played a little more in the background, I think, but really nice work, I think, definitely.
So would this be considered an A?
No, this is probably a D, David. I would think.
Okay, I'm making sure because
Yeah.
she did actually.
Yeah, she got it. She almost flunked this drawing, but no, I'm just kidding. This is an A. Yeah, this is an A. No, I'm not going to penalize.
I'm just curious if it's
because she did such a good job with the drawing. And I didn't probably hit them over the head enough with it, as I am with you guys. There is some stuff going on here. A little more here, you can see it, but then she kind of mitigated it here a little bit in the background. I would have liked more, but she did such a great job with the drawing, I couldn't penalize her for the grade on that. Okay, I want more. I always want more. No, but in terms of the background, but it is a beautiful drawing. Yeah, no, this is an A, David. Yeah, this is an A. Does that help answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yep, that's a good question because it's here's one that. This was from fall. She played a lot more in the background, right? But here's kind of the way it was to begin with. That's a nice transition. That's a good transition. Here's a whereas this, it's just a darkening. There were a few perspectival issues that I dealt with here with her, but that's just kind of like I'm making it darker. Here it's like, oh, I'm making it fuller. I'm making it richer as a drawing, right? So there's more energy, there's more action because I'm spending more time on it, right? So that's the difference between those two drawings. One's not better than the other necessarily, even though I like this drawing quite a bit. But you can kind of see how I'm looking at this. There's still a lot of mark making going on here in this first week's worth of work, right? Just getting the composition, getting the page set up, getting your nice clean white space, getting the lighting going, and then transitioning to a finished drawing here. And I love these little kind of really flares right at the end of the drawing. That's what I'm talking about, breathing life back into a drawing. Okay, one more here I think I have to show you. Yeah, so preliminary, really beautifully done here. But there were some perspectival issues here that I corrected, in the drawing. And then you can see how Paulette just finished it up. Really nice. Kind of include the table, a little bit of, some other element there, window or something. Not too much information, but really a beautiful drawing. But you can kind of see. I just wanted to show you guys these as a way to understand. She spent a little too much time maybe here on these. At the beginning, she could have played out here more, but she eventually got to it, right? Which is really nice. So here's a case in point where she's maybe not too obsessed by the objects, right? And I don't think she's taking a class this semester too, and I'll make sure she doesn't do it. But playing out here would help her see what's going on with these books, so she might not have that perspectival issue there. And then here's the finished version. Really nice sense of light coming in, I think, on that drawing. So, okay, a lot of information there for you guys, but that's why other resources there for you too as well. So. It gets harder. So there you go. I'll probably send out this lecture too, as you can kind of review that if you want to as well. So I'm taping it just so you have that at your disposal. Any quick general questions here? No? set yourself up in a good place, nice open clean area, consistent lighting, white background. You know, if you have a table, you can push it against a wall, that's fine. You have a nice plain white wall. If you have that luxury, you don't have to have a white background. That works sometimes nicely for folks, but keep it clean. Control your lighting. Think about your composition. Work lightly, you know, so you can barely see the drawing for the first hour, 2 hours, right? And then get to a place where, you know, something like that to begin with, real light. Okay, real light. Review the materials. You know, I know you don't have a ton of time, but they're there for you to review if you want to. Okay. That's it.
Understood.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, great
It's
question.
gonna be fun.
Great
I'm
question.
excited to do this.
Yeah, it's a cool project. It's getting that technique with the straight edge and the mark making going. You know, once you get better at that, you move more quickly. But don't push hard. Light touch, okay? Quick but light, like an athlete, right? Great athletes, light on their feet, and quick as heck, okay? All right, and great artists are the same way. So, okay,
Yeah.
all righty, great questions.
thank you.
Okay,
You have a great one.
you too.
Take
Bye
care.
bye. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.